Hello all, it's Deborah Krasniansky from Adai. We're continuing our series of working together as a team for Shalom Bayis. Tonight's talk is about parenting as a team, how to parent together even if you have different styles of parenting, and we're very grateful to Estee Lieblich for presenting tonight. During this call, if you have any questions, you can send it to us at Adai, that's ADAIAD.org/ask-anonymous-question. Ask-anonymous-question. That's adai.org/ask-anonymous-question. As well as you can see other workshops and information at our website at adai.org. So we'll just jump right into tonight's topic. Parenting as a team, even if your parenting style is different. And I want to welcome Estee Lieblich. Estee has a master's degree in early childhood education and special ed. She's been a UPK director for over 10 years at Benos Menachem in Crown Heights. She's an educational consultant for early childhood programs in the tri-state New York area. And she studied temperament theory and works with parents to assess and better understand their own and their children's temperaments. She also gives parenting workshops that focus on creating deep connection with children. So thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Yes, I'm always fascinated with temperament theory. Can we start on that from there?
Sure. So the basic premise of temperament theory is that we're born wired differently at our core. And figuring out our child's temperament really helps us better understand our child's natural talents and strengths. So usually our strengths are also our greatest challenge as well. And not using our talents well is an immaturity. And our job as parents and teachers is to help our children reach maturity. So understanding them, when we understand them, we really can help them. And it's an extremely effective way in understanding your child, connecting to them. And when they feel understood, it really helps build a very strong relationship with them.
Okay. So that's just the basic premise of temperament. I imagine that we'll talk a little bit more throughout the talk about what temperament can look like and how it impacts the way we parent and our children. So,
right.
Estee, how did you get into this in the first place?
So I'm involved in education in early childhood for a long time, and I like to think a lot, and I realize that there's really tremendous value in thinking about children and chinuch. You know, society places so much importance on doing and on actions, and there's so many to-do lists, what to do as a good parent, what you shouldn't do, but really taking a step back from parenting and teaching to observe our children and our students and to reflect on our practices, to create a mission statement for our family, to know clearly what our vision is, and decide what steps we might take to reach those goals. All those are really good things to think about and to discuss, and it helps us be very intentional as parents. And the Rebbe's directive in Hayayim to spend half hour a day thinking about our children's education, and I think that that word thinking is a really, I think it's intentional in that that's exactly the message of what we're meant to do and how valuable just thinking and discussing can be.
Okay. So, Estee, I heard that you use the word parent as a verb, like parenting. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
So, definitely these days, you hear parenting, people talk about it, and some people have objections to the term, but I think it means different things for different people. And for me, I think the action would be involving connecting and disconnecting with our children. When our children feel connected to us, they're very receptive to the chinuch that we try to impart. And when we feel disconnected and they feel disconnected, they're absolutely not a keli to receiving our input and our life lessons and any direction that we try to give them. So similarly, when it comes to parenting as a team, if it's really important to you, it needs to come from a place of connection so that the spouse is receptive. And when we're not feeling connected, we're not receptive. And on the contrary, we're likely to be defensive and reactive.
So do your beliefs about parenting children inform your ideas about parenting as a team also?
Yes, absolutely. So, for example, the way to be if you're talking about, let's say, how to be a calm parent, that's important to you. You might work really hard on trying to control yourself to stay calm. But really a good way to go about it is to assess what your beliefs are about children. If you feel that children are essentially difficult and that they give you a hard time with their fighting and their tantrums, and if you believe that children should have an easy time being polite and cheering and showing gratitude, if it drives you mad that your child has very poor midas, it'll be really difficult for you to be patient with them. Our thoughts and our words literally affect how we respond and deal with our children, and we need to change our beliefs sometimes in order to change our perspective, and then our actions will emerge and follow as well. So really thinking about what we believe about children can help us deal with them in a better way. And believing, some beliefs might be believing that Hashem created our children with their own unique temperament, that they might have many qualities that we might not love or feel very comfortable with, but that's our child's struggle, and that's their challenge. That's the way Hashem created them. Also viewing children's struggles and challenges as a normal part of childhood and the result of having nefesh bahamas and nefesh elokis, and that's a struggle that we really cannot eliminate. And we know even as adults, we still have those struggles. Knowing that we need to respect, this helps us respect and validate our children's struggle. Keeping in mind that our children are not trying to give us a hard time, but rather they're going through a hard time. That really shifts our perspective, and it helps us give our children the kindness that they deserve, even in their ugliest moments. So all of our beliefs can really help us remain calmer in the face of our children's struggle. And notice that I said struggle and not misbehavior, because even the words misbehavior and struggle, they both put me into very different states of mind. And these beliefs help us be compassionate towards our children and help us be the confident leader we need to be by setting limits. These beliefs help us, work with them, not against them. So, knowing when is and when isn't a teachable moment, and teaching them good midas and pro-social behaviors through modeling rather than lecturing or nagging, reminders, and yelling. So really, different sets of beliefs lead us to a very different place in our relationships with our children, with our spouses, with people in general. And, the latter set of beliefs that I mentioned, they really lead to a better connection and helps us deepen our relationship with our children. And which I mentioned about earlier, really when you feel a deep connection, you're receptive to learning. And respectful communication really starts with us. How we speak and act towards our spouse, towards our children, that then filters down to how our children treat and speak to us, to their friends, and to their teachers.
So Estee, you said something really powerful before, that our children aren't trying to give us a hard time, but rather they're going through a hard time. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Sure. Very often when children are crying or having a meltdown, and, we might think it's something really silly, or that they're not being, showing enough gratitude, that they just received something but they want more. A lot of times in those situations we see their, some ugly parts of them, the parts that are maybe we're ashamed of, or we feel are very poor midas, the bad reflection on us, bad reflection on our children, and we don't necessarily deal with it in the way that helps our children. So really, when we understand that children have a harder time than adults regulating themselves, and that the younger they are, the less verbal they are when they get upset, and the more they might yell or kick or scream or whatever it is, knowing that they're coming from a place where they're actually going through a hard time, they're experiencing a difficulty, and they're in distress in those moments, and they don't want to be acting that way. They need your help. And just that perspective really helps you be there for them, help them through it, and then you can have a conversation after about how they might act differently.
So that goes back to the word that you said, that the difference between misbehavior and struggle, because they put you in a very different frame of mind, and you just reiterated that, of what that looks like when we think of it as misbehavior rather than going through a struggle. Automatically,
absolutely,
the word misbehavior sends us down one track of thought, and the struggle sends us down a totally different track of thought. So I think that's a very salient
where we can
point.
Be compassionate to them. Mm-hmm. So these same beliefs about our relationship with our children are really important in all our relationships, including our relationship with our spouse, and are the same beliefs that we'll use in many of our relationships. And if we have a healthy set of beliefs, they can and will help us parent better as a team. So my first point that I'd like to start with is that you and your spouse's relationship with your children are distinct and separate, and that's a really important thing to consider. Even if your spouse parents your child in ways that you don't approve of, keep in mind that your relationship with your child doesn't need to be the same way. And doing whatever you can do to improve your relationship with your child is all that you can do and need to do. Usually, even when parents are on the same page about their ideas about chinuch and children, the way in which both spouses will react and deal with the children will usually look different, and simply because you're two different people with two different temperaments and personalities, two different upbringings, one's male, one's female, wanting to do everything in the same way actually causes stress, and accepting that there are differences that are real actually helps. Just like trying to control our children's emotions just makes us more stressed out, we can't really control our spouse's emotions, and accepting that is a very important place to start. So for example, some parents need immediate compliance and obedience from their children without explanation. You'll have other parents that are more patient, and they'll allow a child a few extra minutes to finish things up. Some people have a fun way of dealing with children. Others are more serious and might not appreciate the noise and wild games. Fathers and sons have a different connection to each other than mothers and their sons, or mothers and daughters, and vice versa, and both are important. Some parents are consciously or subconsciously dealing with their children in the way in which their parents dealt with them when they were children. They might react really quickly. Others will hold it in and spill that later. It's not a matter of what's right or wrong. It's rather our temperaments and hardwiring, our experiences, our childhood really make us this way. And realizing that differences are normal is very helpful. And accepting that you and your spouse have separate relationships with your children that are distinct from each other is empowering. And just a message of don't get dragged down over your differences. And again, I want to point out that I'm not referring to neglectful or abusive relationships. I'm talking about normally kind, decent people who parent differently. Sometimes your different reaction situations might make you think that you have very different visions, but in reality, your vision for what you want your home to be like might actually be the same or very similar to your spouse. So it's really important to have an open, honest conversation with your spouse, and when you're not stressed, about what your visions about parenting and chinuch are, about the ways in which you were raised, and the way that you act now with your children, what you're proud of, what you feel bad about, how you'd like the atmosphere of your home to be like, about your relationship with each other, and, understanding how you each came to your philosophies on parenting and the way you act and why you act the way you do is an extremely important part of this process to help you understand each other and work as a team. And after you have a conversation like that, you could see how and if they align. Sometimes people that think they have very different visions, once they actually have this conversation, they see that their visions actually do align, but rather they have different ideas or take different paths on how to reach their goals. So, having a conversation and the realization that your actions and reactions might actually be veering you away from your vision, not helping you towards realizing your vision, all of these are really important things to discuss if you want to really parent as a team.
You said a lot there. I think that the conversations to have with your spouse about their visions of parenting and the hows of parenting and how they got there can be really powerful. You may hear some things that you really didn't expect. So I think that it's really worth a date night on that. So.
Yeah, I agree. Some people will naturally have this kind of conversation more often, and some people rarely, if ever. And it's definitely it's something that's important to make sure happens. Sharing your vision with your spouse and accepting that you go about things differently, and accepting that your relationship is different, all that is good, but it has to come with a conversation first that helps you really understand why your spouse is acting a certain way, or even why you are acting a certain way towards your children. And it's important to really know how to have a good conversation. Good conversations, of course, involve both talking and truly listening. And you need to be fully present in the moment, not to be busy with anything else. You can really pay attention. And like you said, being prepared to learn something new about your spouse. Ask questions and be open to really accepting what you hear. Try to figure out together why you believe what you believe. Understand your own bias, where it stems from. And the important part here is that the more your spouse feels your acceptance, the less vulnerable they'll be, the more likely they'll be able, or you'll both be able to hear each other's point of view. And mostly listen with the intent to understand and not just to reply. Really learn a lot.
Definitely. Lisa Twersky's talk earlier this week, and if anyone wants to catch that, it's also on adai.org/past-events. She spoke a lot about communication and about having these kinds of conversations and how to be curious. She also included some vocabulary words and phrases that are helpful to such conversations. So throwing that in. So can we talk a little bit more about this intentionality? There are some parents that do this very well, and then there are some parents that kind of are busy and just take day by day. And you said that the importance of sharing a vision, sharing what your family mission is Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, taking the time to really figure all these things out will make all the difference. So many, parenting is difficult, and being busy, and, we juggle so many different things, lots of children, two parents working, a very busy society. And so a lot of parents feel the stress that builds up over time. And sometimes when we're living day to day and very in the moment and we don't have time to extract ourselves and think about it, the stress only exacerbates and we can't get away from it. So finding the time to have this, conversation, and it might be a difficult one, is really important to help alleviate the stress and help get you back on track. Getting back on track, even if you don't find all the answers, but just knowing that you've had a conversation and you both have a similar vision, or you want to work towards a similar vision, or you'd like to be on the same page if you're not, it really helps set the tone to help things be more intentional. Being intentional means that you've given thought to what you're doing. You're not just reacting in the moment. And of course, the stress sometimes gets the better of us and we do just react in the moment. But again, being able to, pull out your set of beliefs and think about it, and it just helps get you back on track. So being intentional is really, being a good parent is being intentional in everything that you do, and that really involves also this thought process to help you be intentional.
I would imagine that some of it is like just understanding how boys in our system have grown up, and for like a mother of sons who doesn't understand what happens in the boys' schools and what happens and the rough playing that happens in camp, I think that it can be very enlightening. And similarly, if our father could understand what happens in girls' school and what kind of things girls hang and talk about, and especially if he didn't have any sisters who are growing up. So I think that these kind of conversations just add a lot of perspective and can widen both parents' horizons and understandings of what is happening for their children, especially the children of the other gender.
Absolutely, yeah, you're absolutely right. So many times we think we know and we have our ideas, but we don't truly understand, and absolutely finding out from the other spouse and getting a perspective from them can really help us.
So there are many stories where the mother doesn't want the father to roughhouse with the kid, and the boy, especially the son, and the father knows that the boys can handle it, and the mother's a little concerned.
Mm-hmm.
So, just really having that kind of conversation and realizing that children's bodies are really resilient enough for most of that roughhousing, and it's okay, mm-hmm. even though it seems ridiculous, right. and kids can be washed, so kids can get dirty, and things mm-hmm. like that. So that kind of conversation of where is it coming from? What makes roughhousing so interesting and important for the relationship, rather than why do you do that? But what about it is so interesting to you? A whole different kind mm-hmm. of conversation. But I think that the whole gender, the opposite gender, is a really important part of the conversation. And for many, I just know from amongst my own friends when we were talking about it, we just totally didn't understand why men think it's important, and have not listened curiously. We were just dismissing their whole point of view, and we missed out some wonderful opportunity to really understand what was going on in the boys' schools. And some of it does make sense once
mm-hmm.
you hear about it, even though on surface it may not.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, I agree with everything you're saying. Mm-hmm. And it's a good opportunity, exactly like you're saying, great opportunity to learn more about boys from your husband, or to learn about girls from your wife, etc.
Okay, so Estee, we were talking about sharing the vision. Can we jump back to that now? Okay, so like I mentioned earlier about the Rebbe's directive and the Yom Yom about spending that half hour thinking about your child's education, and that it's as important as a mitzvah as putting on film daily. So really, this is a really wonderful opportunity for parents to work together as a team. Take that half hour seriously and discuss your vision, discuss how it aligns with Torah values, how it helps you connect to your children, how it can make them more receptive to the chinuch that you try to impart, how it can encourage them to be mentioned in your Shemayim. These reflections and thoughts and conversations are, like we've been saying over and over, a really important part of parenting as a team. And the importance of this process of sharing the vision with your spouse, as well as accepting that you both go about it in somewhat different ways, right? Your parenting looks different, and accepting that your relationship with your kids is distinct and separate from each other, and that they both have value. And so really, when you're in a situation where your spouse acts
towards your child in a way that you feel is too harsh, and is very different from how you feel it should have been dealt with. Instead of getting angry at your spouse, you can just validate your child. For example, a child who comes home, who comes to you crying that they're upset, the way that their mommy or tati, might have yelled at them or something, or the way they dealt with the situation, took something away, and you can say, you're upset that you were yelled at. You don't like being yelled at, or you're upset, that mommy took away the toy, or you're upset that tati yelled at you. And this shows the child that you hear them and their pain, but doesn't put down your spouse or their parenting methods.
So when would we bring up with our spouse, or in the moment, what should we be doing?
So in a situation where, someone sees or hears their spouse dealing with a situation, right? What do you do? So really the first thing is not to do anything in the moment and really just respect your spouse's struggle. Your spouse's history and temperament can help you better understand what's behind their habits. And the first step to moving away from bad habits is to accept that you and your spouse have them. And accepting without judging the other person is really important, because judging isn't fully accepting and really gets in the way of you respecting the other struggle. Like we mentioned earlier with children, the nefesh habahamis, nefesh elikis, it's true for us adults as well. And so really respecting our spouse's struggle means that we understand that this is a big challenge for them. Parenting is hard, and it's hard for them to change old habits. And this allows us to be more empathetic and compassionate towards our spouse. And this is especially true for, so many people who describe themselves as kind, decent people who just overact with their children. Again, just like children, we all have a struggle within us. For everyone, it's different and different things. And that first step of accepting that people struggle and that we're constant work in progress, it helps us stay calm, because rather than feel anger, we feel compassion. So in a moment where someone observes or sees their spouse reacting in a way that they feel is harsh to their child, first to realize that the spouse is also going through a struggle of their own and doesn't necessarily want to be this way, doesn't necessarily like it, might not know how to be different. And so respecting that struggle. And then the next step would be to be validating your spouse's struggle. And validating the struggle really means to use language to convey that you understand their challenge. Right? We want to foster an attitude of how can I help my spouse become more loving and respectful and connected to our kids. So rather than tell us your spouse after a negative interaction with the kids, they'd really probably benefit most from, that was rough. Sorry you had to deal with that. You're having a really difficult time with our child. This parenting stuff is hard. I know how hard it is for you to deal with a crying baby, or I know how much you dislike when the kids don't listen right away. Right? So when you're going through a tough time, even as an adult, when you're validated, you really feel heard and understood, and the negative emotions, like there's a chance for them to dissipate. It's really a gift to the other person when we can validate them. It doesn't necessarily mean that you condone their behavior, right? But you're letting them know that you see how difficult it is for them. And then...
Can I just jump in for a minute?
Sure.
What if your spouse doesn't think that the behavior is off? You're just thinking that it's off. So validating is not necessarily, what he needs to hear.
That's a good question, but I feel like most times when people have lost their patience or are being harsh, or even you'll see this with children, when children are being mean or they're very upset about something and overreacting, they don't necessarily like what they're feeling inside of them.
Yeah, I guess.
So I think that there's always this place for validating. Not to say, oh, you've just done something wrong, but I understand you, but just to validate that, wow, you seem really stressed, or, that you see what they're experiencing, or this seems really hard for you. Obviously, if you don't think that they would appreciate that kind of comment, if they might not like you to say that this is hard for them, then it might not be the place for it. But there's definitely a way for everyone to show compassion to someone who's experiencing some type of distress. And I think that in a lot of these interactions with parents and children where the parent is being too harsh, or they're just feeling really angry, they're also experiencing something inside of them that doesn't feel very good.
Okay. That makes sense. Okay, so sorry for interrupting. I'll jump back in.
Okay, so you asked before what to do in the situation, right? And so respecting their struggle and validating their struggle. And then really in the moment, that's all that should happen. If you need to validate your child and empathize with him, if or her, if you really feel that something, the interaction was really unpleasant and hard on the child, definitely you could give the child the comfort that they need without feeling that you're disrespecting your spouse. And you need to do it in a way that it doesn't disrespect your spouse at all, but just comforts your child. That's okay. But really, the best way to get our spouse and our children to learn how to be good people and how to do things in ways that form connection and not disconnection is really to model, and just to model. It's like really show through your actions and your speech how you like things to be done, and hopefully the people around you will learn from it. Everyone around us learns more from what we do than what we say, and we know that it's true, but it's hard to always stick to it, when we so badly want to fix something or we feel like we need to critique someone. But really talking less, preaching and lecturing less, and correcting less is key here. Hold yourself back, bite your tongue if you have to, and model the behavior that you want your children and yourself to see and say. If you want your children and spouse to stay calm even in the heat of the moment, let them see and hear how you deal with stress. You might say something like, "This is getting really frustrating for me. I need to leave the room for a few minutes," or "I feel like I'm starting to get upset. I need to take a few deep breaths." When you react kindly to your tantruming child, your spouse, who might hate the sound of loud crying, now learns a new method of staying calm by observing you. And sometimes we know that our spouse doesn't like something, and that might make us work very hard to avoid it. For example, if you have a spouse that doesn't like loud crying, you might have a newborn baby, and what do? You might feel really stressed when your baby's crying as well, trying to stop something that you really can't stop. And so modeling how to be calm in the face of behavior that doesn't calm people and makes them tense is really helping teach him something very valuable as well. So if you want your spouse to learn new techniques, model day in, day out, and they will pick up. It might take time. Of course, it'll take time in the same way that any learning new habits and learning new ways to respond takes time, but they'll hear the new language that you're using when you're dealing with stress and with conflict resolution, and they'll learn from you. And it's also useful to intentionally model to your spouse in front of your children. If you see your children having a hard day, you might say something like, "It seems like Yankee's having a really hard day. I wonder what we can do to help him through it." Or, "Connie seems extra touchy today. One of us should really give her some extra one-on-one time." All of that kind of modeling really helps the people around you learn how to react in a kind, compassionate way, even with the stress of parenting.
What I've seen is that when they see the success of this method, not only modeling, but they see that it's successful. So whether the children see it successful, your spouse sees it successful, then it's even more so that they'll pick up on it and say, "Hey, that really works." So
absolutely. So really, where this comes from is, there are a lot of parents that will feel comfortable validating their children, but less comfortable validating their spouse. Maybe because it's easier to feel vulnerable around little children than it is around our spouse, or for whatever reason, it might not feel natural for them and maybe more comfortable with a child. But really, validating helps everybody feel calmer. When anybody's experiencing any type of stress, validating calms it down. And so using this type of, being very validating, empathetic, and compassionate around your home really helps everyone feel calmer. And absolutely, the spouse starts to see how this type of reaction of the other parent leads to calmer behavior with the children, less tantruming, less conflict, more connection, more closeness, more laughter. It really leads to an easier parenting, and that's absolutely the best proof that you need to get anybody on board. My last and really important point here is that most opportunities where we use to express what we want or how we'd like the other person to do something are probably like the worst possible times usually. If we want the other spouse to be receptive and not reactive or defensive, we can really never bring up issues in the heat of the moment when we'd like to. So, someone observes their spouse in a really negative interaction with their child, it's really not the time to talk about it right then, and neither is it a few minutes later. And it's of utmost importance to know when is and when is not a teachable moment. As we mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, our children and our spouse are most receptive to us when they feel connected to us. And in those moments when people are feeling stressed by negative interactions or difficult behavior that their children are experiencing and the parents are feeling that stress, that's really not the time that our spouse would feel receptive to anything that we're telling them, even if it makes a lot of sense. Whereas at a later time in a conversation, not in the heat of the moment, they can hopefully accept it and hear it for what it is.
So, something else that Lisa was saying is that we want to have these kinds of conversations, especially when you want to bring something to someone's attention, something perhaps like some negative feedback of some sort. Make sure the timing is right. Ask for permission. Is now a good time? Can I share something that I observed earlier today? Can I share my perspective on what happened today? So that you're kind of not springing something big on them, and really trying to come from a place of, let's do this for our kid, and I just want to share something, and take it or not just now, but like it really has to come from a place of love and concern for our child, for us, and for ourselves, and for your stress level of working with
I love that. That's absolutely true, and that actually gives the other person the opportunity to say, maybe not right now, a little later, where again puts them in a place where they'll be more receptive and not in a defensive state. It's a great suggestion.
It's also the same thing as that if you're giving a message to somebody, it's really in the hands of the interpreter. So if they're not ready to receive it, there's no point in even saying it. So the timing has to be right, the body language has to be right, and your personal relationship has to be right. If you're always criticizing, then this is just one more. The defense mechanisms go up before you even open your mouth.
Even say anything. Right. Absolutely.
Sometimes they can just see your eyes and they know that we're not heading to a good place right now.
Right. I think another point, like in line with what you're saying, is to give the spouse an opportunity to bow out of the situation. So if that's also something that spouses can agree upon ahead of time, that if you're in a situation that you feel you can't handle, can we be okay with asking the other spouse, do you want me to take over? And sometimes there's tremendous relief if you feel like you're not handling the situation right, and your spouse looks at you and says, you want me to take over, or you do it with them, and you can just, extricate yourself from a difficult interaction, and the calmer parent can now take over.
Well, perhaps calmer just because they haven't been in this particular struggle for that many minutes as the other parent, so you just
absolutely. I didn't mean calmer. I didn't mean calmer in temperament and personality. I meant calmer right now in this moment. Absolutely, like you're saying.
I'm wondering if there might be some value in coming up with some sort of secret body language thing. Please come help me, without saying it out loud in front of the children. So eventually the kids will pick up. But when the kids are very little, it's I need you. Maybe we need to be 2 on 2 here rather than just 1 on 2. I need a second pair. So there might be some value in coming up with either a secret word or a secret body language that the other parents can pick up that there's some assistance needed here.
Right. Or even if really, I guess it would be whatever you agree upon, even if it's a very direct sentence. Do you want me to get involved? But really, whatever works for people.
Well, also the other person can be asking for help. Not only do you want me to get involved, it's
absolutely,
you get involved?
Yeah. Can you please help? Absolutely. Please take over.
There's a lot going on right here.
Right.
The other thing I found with validation, I know for myself when I was learning this technique, and I found that at first it was a little bit difficult to come up with wording of validation. Now it's second nature. But what I found the benefit for me as a validator is that I kind of saw myself in the other person's shoes and what was going on for them, and it kind of calmed me down on the reaction that they were doing. Even if it wasn't something I agreed on, I realized that it was coming from a place of difficulty, or it was coming from a place of excitement, or whatever it was. It helped me get into their shoes. So I really thought.
Yeah, I actually love that you brought that up. Yeah, I love that you brought that up, because I feel that when I speak about validating, I talk about what a gift you're giving the person that you're validating, and I absolutely agree with you that you're really giving yourself a gift as well, because like you said, you start to feel now, you put yourself in the other person's shoes, you're feeling empathy and compassion, and you're calmer rather than getting yourself all worked up. So absolutely, it's amazing how validating really, you think you're doing it for the other person, and it really affects you in a huge way as well. And so, of course, it's also important to encourage your spouse and to give them positive feedback. Again, when they're receptive to it, when you're feeling connected, not in the moment, to give them feedback about what you saw that went well. You know, if you have a situation with your child where your spouse did act in a way that was kinder, less harsh than usual, and you saw that your child reacted in a more positive way, bringing that to the attention of your spouse later on is really valuable as well. Sometimes they don't get to see, you know, sometimes they leave the house, they're out for Minfarm or whatever, and you saw the results that later on, you know, your daughter was just in better mood as the day went on. So it's really important to encourage through validating. I know this is hard for you, you know, but you're doing great. Thank you for trying. That goes a long way, as well as also checking in every so often. You know, if you have these conversations about your goals and your vision, and you know you're taking your half hour a day seriously when you talk about chinuch, so really just checking in with each other every so often and ask, you know, how are we doing? You know, are we moving towards our goals? Are we really, you know, kind of like, do we have to veer and get back on track?
Very good. Do you want to kind of wrap it up before we ask the questions that came in?
Really, to summarize everything that we've just discussed, you know, how to parent as a team, even when your parenting styles look different, is to really see what your vision is and to know that people have different styles and it's normal to have different styles, and your different temperaments and personalities and experiences and history will determine the way you act with your children, but that can change. But first step is to accept this is who we are and that you want to work towards making things better, and that happens through having real honest conversations about your goals and your vision and understanding where the other person is coming from. And really, like we said, understanding their struggle, respecting their struggle, validating them. And the most effective technique really is to model the behavior and the words that you want to see. Treating your children really kindly when they're having a tantrum. You know, if you need to set limits and be a confident leader, absolutely, we need to do that as parents, but that can still have to happen with compassion and validation. And when that happens with compassion and validation, we deepen our connection with our children, and they might not be thrilled at what we're telling them to do or not to do, but they see that we're coming from a place of understanding and connection. And that's really the goal with our spouse as well, where when we're validating their struggle, when we come from a place where we are in this together and we want to be partners and we understand that there are differences, but we work together as a team, we can really be very successful in our parenting.
I love how you said that we generally parents have the same vision. They just have different trajectories and different ways of getting there, and that we recognize that there's just different ways of getting to the same place. A lot of the stress of it has to be this way or it has to be that way falls aside because we are getting to the same place.
Right.
Absolutely. So I think that's really, really, really key of keeping that in mind. Of course, you can check in every so often to make sure that you really are going to the same place. Okay, so thank you, Estee, for all that. There's a lot there. Again, this has been recorded, so for those who want to take it in slowly, it's at Adai, adai.org/past-events. This will be probably up tomorrow or so. So a question came in, Estee. Some of the wording that you shared seemed very contrived or stilted. I can't imagine doing that. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, so definitely if, you know, this is not natural to you and you haven't been raised in this way, and, you know, it's probably new for a lot of people, it feels awkward. It definitely feels awkward to be validating, and I've actually found that parents with children who are already a little bit older, like teenagers especially, will be like, Ma, like, what's happening? What are you saying? What's going on? Everything okay? And so definitely being this way it takes some practice, and, you know, just using the language will get you more used to it. Seeing the results of it will make you feel so much more comfortable with it. And sometimes it's easier to start with validating our children, and then from there take it on to validating our spouse as well. But, you know, using that language consistently, you know, it looks like you're going through, you seem like you're having a really hard day today, or you're so sad right now, what can I do to help you? Using that kind of language, if you're children makes it easier to use it with your spouse if you find that it's difficult for you. And even if it feels fake in the beginning, just power through it, because eventually anything that you practice enough will become more comfortable after a while. And then seeing the results of how your children are calmer through it will hopefully inspire you to keep going.
If I can just add from my own experiences as I was learning to validate more often, sometimes they fall flat and sometimes they're over-exaggerated, but the practice time is very short. Eventually, and this is shown in literature also, that very soon thereafter it becomes natural and you do it right. So there's only a few mistakes, but that's okay. I just wanted to
always right. Not to beat ourselves up too much about mistakes, because that just leads to guilt, which doesn't lead to anything good. But just always know there's the next opportunity, there's the next moment, there's the next day, and working on it.
Okay, so this question came in, but I think that we kind of addressed it, maybe just rehash it a little bit. My husband acts pretty rough with my kids in a good way. I guess probably playing outside kind of thing, I'm guessing. It still freaks me out, and I always scream, even though I know it's okay. How do I? And I don't know if that's the rest of the jar.
Okay, I mean, I'd probably suggest just going out of the room, really, because if there's a situation where if you trust your spouse in that situation and you know that they're in good hands, but you're just extremely uncomfortable with it, you might want to figure out why it's uncomfortable for you. You might want to, figure out what about it bothers you. Sometimes there are things that just seem so wrong, and then when we really just assess our thoughts and think about it a little more, we could come to a new place and a new way of thinking about it. But if it's something that you don't feel comfortable with, but in general you trust your spouse, I would say just leave it to your spouse and go read a book for a few minutes while you're taking care of them.
Someone once told me, you don't know what happens in boys' camps over the summer. So, and they come back whole. Okay, they come back with dirty laundry and half the laundry's missing, but they come back whole and they had a wonderful summer. Some of what's happening in camp is that little roughhousing that your husband does.
Absolutely.
So just you don't know. That's sort of building on what you were saying, because in camp you just don't know it for 2 months. You're not watching it, and you're okay.
Right.
So take that same thing and just bring it in.
It's also keeping in mind that the more you're going to tell your spouse to stop doing certain things or to act differently, even in situations that aren't so negative, the less receptive they'll probably be to hearing, about changing habits and acting in different ways. So a situation like that, I would think doesn't need to be mentioned at all. If it's something that you feel is dangerous, then absolutely a discussion, instead of screaming, a discussion at a later or earlier time to preempt it in the future would definitely be helpful.
Similarly, someone was complaining that her husband does something that's embarrassing, he sings with the kids in the supermarket. Now, okay, it's not usual behavior, but it's not dangerous behavior, and it's not super strange. But she gets all annoyed by it. But it's really okay behavior. It's okay, and it doesn't really need a reprimand, and it doesn't really need a stop. It's just not behavior that you might have done.
Yeah, I agree. And really, it's interesting how a question like that is probably something that I would assume could be a struggle with her children as well. There are always going to be things in, the people we love, the people we live with, and their temperaments and personalities that don't quite feel so comfortable to us and don't feel so familiar, and we might feel very different than us, and we don't like it, and we want to change it. But that's really not accepting them for who they are, who Hashem created them to be. So accepting that we're all different and not everything will be exactly in the way in which you envision it, and we have our own personalities, and all of that brings something wonderful to the table, and not, really getting hard, and down on people for things that come naturally to them and aren't dangerous or negative, really.
And the other thing is, I feel that sometimes when parents are different, or specifically because they're different, the kids get a more rounded understanding of the world, more rounded experiences. If one parent is more into museums and the other one is more into hiking, and one is more into amusement parks, then the hiking parent takes the kids hiking, and the museum parent takes the kids museuming, And the amusement park parent, I guess there's only two parents, but the idea of so the kids get more. If a parent only did what one parent wanted, then the kids would be missing out on full experience. So I think that we should be celebrating our differences and the different experiences that we give the children.
Yes, absolutely. I agree with that. Everything that children experience in life, negative or positive, all of that feeds into who they become as a person and helps us grow. And so definitely if the differences are just things that we feel uncomfortable or embarrassed about, that's really work we have to do on ourselves to, like you're saying, embrace our differences and feel more comfortable with it.
Yeah. So in addition, I felt that when we have these differences and we accept these differences, we are now tolerant of these differences. We actually model tolerance, and I think that's a very important skill for children, for everybody, really. So I think that the idea that there's different ways of saying the same thing and being tolerant of it actually, firstly, expands the child's vocabulary, but it also teaches the kids tolerance. So I think that all of that together is really important.
Mm-hmm. It's a great point.
So this other question just came in. So I hear some people thanking the child for behaving. What are your thoughts about that?
So I absolutely love thanking my children, and I'll explain to you why. I think that there's a huge emphasis in schools and homes as well, for prizes and rewards and sticker charts for doing ordinary good deeds. And there's a lot of external motivation, and we really want children to do things from a place of being internally motivated. They should want to do good, and it should feel good to do something good. But really, how do we train them to be that way? I find that when a child does something helpful, even something that they need to do, like make their bed or put their laundry away or whatever it might be, when we thank them, they get the message that that was something that was well appreciated, and hopefully that feeling of being helpful should be a really good feeling that washes over them, and so they should want to do it again in the future.
Marshall Goldsmith also talks about the idea of when you're thanking someone to add into the thanking formula, so to say, of how whatever they did enriched your life, so that they really see how they are a contributing member of the family or a contributing member of the classroom. So, thank you for sitting there quietly while I finish my phone conversation. So now I can finish it in peace in mind, or whatever it is, so the kids can understand what he did and how it was valuable or useful, or that they feel even more validated for doing whatever it is that they did.
I absolutely agree with that, but it's actually interesting. A lot of times, I've had this discussion in large groups where you'll find teachers and parents have a difficult time with the concept of thanking my child. Why do I need to thank my child for, bringing napkins to the dinner table? I mean, I just made dinner, and they're part of the family. Why do I have to thank them for it? But I think that if we take a step back and just think as an adult, we want thanks for all the thankless jobs that we do day in and day out. And just getting that thanks gives us the encouragement to keep doing it, and knowing that people appreciate it and took the moment to thank us is really, it helps us. It helps us to keep doing what we're doing.
I mean, when my kids were little, we used to talk about how a family does things together. So, thank you for bringing that to the table. Thank you for bringing the table. It's great when we all work together to make this dinner come to the table, so that they know that they're contributing members. And I think that that's also part of what we were saying, that they feel good about it, and I don't have to give them candy or dessert because they brought the stuff to the table.
Right. Absolutely. That feeling of doing good for someone should be the reward for doing the deed.
And certainly a whole different conversation, but certainly not nosh or other unhealthy foods or even healthy foods. We don't reward with food, but that's a whole different conversation.
Right.
So once again, thank you, Estee. This has been great. So there was a lot to think about. Again, this has been recorded for those who want to take it in slower or just to rehear all these important points. It's at adai.org/past-events. And if you have any other questions for Estee or for Adai, you can check that out on Estee's page on the Adai website. The recording of this and links to Estee's information will be there as well. So once again, thank you, and good night, everybody.
Thanks so much for having me. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you.